What is a spiritual wound that unites all of humanity? What is an experience that we all have, that maybe we all share, that is a spiritual problem or sickness that gets in the way of our relationship with the Father? I think that, as I pray and reflect on this gospel this weekend, it seems to me that that spiritual wound that exists for all of us is a lack of trust. I think that the way we can identify that is in your own spiritual lives. What happens when you encounter or face some type of suffering? Whether it's physical, emotional, psychological, whatever it is, what happens to your spiritual life when you encounter that suffering? And I think if you're like me, and I think we all share this in some way, that there's two responses we tend to have. The first response we tend to have to some type of suffering is that God must be vindictive, that God's getting revenge, because there must be something in my life, must be some sin that I committed or maybe will commit in the future, that's the reason God gave me this suffering. He must be getting back at me in some way. The other response we at times have maybe isn't that God's getting revenge. It might be more about God's lack of care, that God's apathetic, that our God is just absent. That for whatever reason, God has forgotten me. And so I think that if you're like me, these are the two responses we tend to have when we experience some type of suffering, that God is either trying to get even or God just doesn't care enough to be there for me. And if you really boil it down, it comes back to trust. Do we really trust in our God, who is a loving Father, who is there for us? And I think St. Thomas is the same way. St. Thomas in our gospel has the same experience, the same spiritual wound, and it maybe has to take a little bit more to see it, but imagine the experience. His brothers come back to him and they say, "We've seen the Lord," and he says, "I will not believe until I see him." You have to wonder, was Thomas' lack of belief because for some reason he was believing lies interiorly, that somehow he thought God had lost, or somehow he thought that God had abandoned him, or Jesus really wasn't who he said he was, that he lied about his identity. There's all these lies that St. Thomas is believing, and it comes down to a lack of trust in God's goodness. And God always wants to heal us from our wounds. He wants to heal us from our lack of trust. And so this homily is going to be a little more brief than normal today, because there's a powerful testimony at the end of Mass about how God desires to heal and restore us and make us whole again. But I want you to watch Thomas. What does Thomas do? He identifies his wound. He identifies his lack of belief, his lack of trust. And what does he allow himself to do? He allows himself to go with his brothers back to Jesus. And the most powerful part of our gospel is not only that he goes back to Jesus, but he has this very intimate, profound encounter with Jesus. It's one of my favorite moments in all of Scriptures, when Thomas is there before Jesus, and Jesus says, "Put your hands on my wounds, because it's by my wounds that you're going to be healed." It's by Christ's wounds that Thomas is going to experience his own healing from his own woundedness. And so he does. He places his hands on his wounds, and he is healed. There's that great profession of faith, "My Lord and my God." The experience of healing allows Thomas to reject the lies he was believing before, that God somehow had lost and abandoned them, and now he can accept the truth of what really is, that God has won and always will be with him. What's your spiritual wound? Follow Thomas. Identify it. Bring it to Jesus, and allow Jesus to replace the lies with his truth. Because our church, Jesus' church, Jesus always wants you to be about healing. He wants to heal whatever is broken within, because he is always about bringing us back to the Father and restoring us as his beloved sons and daughters.